Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this month's PeopleSoft Master Series webinar, Cool Tools for Business Analysts, Getting the Most Out of Page and Field Configurator. This is the latest in a monthly series of webinars that Gideon Taylor has been hosting to help you drive greater value and greater productivity out of your PeopleSoft applications. A couple of quick housekeeping items. One is we are recording today's webinar. You'll receive an email with a link to view the webinar again following our webinar today. That email will also contain some links to upcoming webinars if you'd like to join us for future webinars in this series. I also wanted to mention that if you have questions as we're going along, please post those within the Zoom tool. We're going to be taking pauses throughout the course of the webinar to address questions that come up. We'll also reserve some time at the end to address questions. Two upcoming webinars that we have on the calendar. One is our April webinar, Do Me a Favor, Open the Door and Let Them In, including external participants in PeopleSoft Workflow. And May 12th, we're hosting PeopleSoft Visualized, getting the big picture with pivot grids, analytics, and Kibana. And we certainly encourage you to join us for those webinars. As a little bit of background in terms of Gideon Taylor, we've actually been working with PeopleSoft for many years. We started as a PeopleSoft consultancy back in 2001, helping organizations implement, upgrade, maintain, and optimize their PeopleSoft systems. And over the years, our focus has really grown to emphasize revolutionizing business processes, helping organizations create their own custom applications within PeopleSoft to drive greater self-service and greater efficiency. Our vision is to help our clients work simply, effectively, efficiently, and flexibly. There are three logos on this slide that I'll point out. One is the largest one being our Oracle Gold partnership. We have been a long-time Oracle partner. And the two smaller ones symbolize our certification by Oracle of a software tool that we provide, GT eForms for PeopleSoft, that allows for organizations to create these powerful workflow-enabled custom applications inside their PeopleSoft systems. But the Oracle Validated Integration Program certifies GT eForms integration within PeopleSoft. In addition to our own GT eForms tool, we also help clients that are implementing other PeopleSoft delivered tools and technologies to help with custom automation. One of those is activity guides and guided self-service, Page and Field Configurator, which we're going to be talking about today, drop zones, PeopleSoft Forms and Approval Builder, and also custom development with the approval framework. This is what we lovingly refer to as our NASCAR slide. Just a quick shot of some of the many organizations that we've worked with over the years, specifically to help them drive greater automation within their PeopleSoft systems. And now I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to hand it off to Margaret Flint. Margaret is our speaker for today's webinar. She is a senior business analyst with Gideon Taylor Consulting. So Margaret, take it away.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to talk to you about Page and Field Configurator. I did just finish a big project with it and lots and lots to learn about it, so I'm hoping to share some of that with you today, help you decide whether Page and Field Configurator is a good option for you in some of your projects. So we'll talk a little bit more in the next slide about what you can expect from this session today, and then I'll give a brief introduction of Page and Field Configurator. We'll talk a little bit more about the business problem that we applied Page and Field Configurator to. And then a little bit more about the solution, how the solution was implemented, what the solution ended up looking like in the end. And then we'll go over some of the good, the bad, and the ugly, the lessons learned, the gotchas, et cetera, things to kind of help you know what to expect. And we'll talk about recommendations and precautions. So when is this tool right for you? Hopefully this webinar today will help you answer some of those questions. And at the end, whatever questions you have, would be happy to field as much of them as I can. So what to expect for this session today? Gratuitous infographics. This is really the only one that we have up here today, but you know, who doesn't love a pie chart? Hopefully you get a good visual. We will talk a little bit about how to use the Page and Configurator tool, but not much. In learning how to use this tool myself, there's a ton of blogs, Oracle webinar, Oracle videos. There's a lot of content out there to help you learn the nuts and bolts of what to click and when. So we'll do just a brief overview of the how to use it kind of topics. What we'll talk more about is how it is applied and what you can expect once you get it up and running. How does it actually work? What does it do to your components? Stuff like that. So we'll spend a little bit more time there. And then at the very end, I'm going to pass it back to Scott. We'll do some of your questions. And then also as many shameless marketing plugs as possible. That's also involved here today. So let's do a brief introduction. What is Page and Field Configurator? If you're new to Page and Field Configurator, it's a configuration-based tool that lets you customize classic and fluid pages without using App Designer. This is a functional tool. So if you know how to use Control-J, if you know how to use Inspect Element in your browser, you should really be good to go. Page and Field Configurator is available right now if you have the versions of PeopleSoft included that you see in this screen. So 8.56 People Tools and up, you should be able to use Page and Field Configurator. You can find it in your Enterprise Components menu. And just a brief how-to. An overview here is you can use your Control-J to find your market and component, and that's what you use to start your Page and Field Configurator setup. And then use your browser's inspect tool to right-click and find the fields that you're looking to adjust. Once you kind of know what it is that you want to adjust, you can navigate to the Page and Field Configurator component. And then you can add the fields that you want to adjust, make the adjustments that you're interested in. You can apply criteria to further restrict what users can do, including adding user lists to restrict which users are going to see the alternate displays that you're creating. And then finally, you're going to map all these changes to portal registry, which is really easy push-button configuration. That's a very brief overview, so why not take a little video tour of how quick and easy it is to get up and running in Page and Field Configurator. So what you're going to see here is I'm going to go ahead and add a new value. This is going to be an existing registered component. This is a Campus Solutions example. It's going to set up for me everything that I need to get started. I'm going to add some descriptions here. And then in the field properties, I'm simply going to select the fields that I want to make adjustments to one by one. For this field, I'm going to hide it and then add a new row, find a new field. All these two fields that I'm selecting are on the first page of the component. In this example, I'm going to modify a label. The next field, I'm actually going to navigate to a different page on the same component. Headed to the second page, class meetings. It's going to load up all of the fields that I have available on that page. I'm going to select the field. And here I'm going to make this field required. It's not already required. Find a new field. On a different page, this is the third page that I'm selecting a field from. And for this field, I'm going to disable entry. I'm going to make it display only, and then I'm going to set a default value. That means the default value always appears for the user, and they can't change it. I'm also going to take this opportunity to hide a couple of tabs, or at least one tab that the users never use. So now they can't see that tab. And then here on the user list page, I'm going to decide that only the people with this undergraduate curriculum coordinator role will see the configurations that I made on the first page. Finally, I'm going to apply this new configuration to the portal registry. And by clicking the review event mapping, you can see that all of the event mapping is automatically applied. There's no further configuration I have to do on the event mapping page, but it's good to know that the event mapping page is the workhorse of Page and Field Configurator. That is a very, very brief overview and a very brief video. Again, we're not going to try to teach you how to use this tool too much here today, but I'm very happy to answer more of your how-to questions at the end of the presentation if you have some more of them. You can definitely field those. But what I really wanted to do was get right into this business problem here. This is a business problem at an actual client university. They actually ended up going live with this proof of concept, and it's a reasonably complex proof of concept for the course catalog and schedule of classes in Campus Solution. This client university has about 9 different colleges, and each of these colleges has their own registrar. For those of you out in the campus world, you know that can sometimes lead to some complex solutions being needed. The different colleges include the main arts and science undergraduate and graduate colleges, which encompass the most diversity of departments, as well as other specific specialty graduate schools. So the business problem, what we found was that the registrar for the main arts and sciences undergraduate college found that curriculum coordinators who were responsible for maintaining the course catalog and schedule of classes, they're using these pages, but they're complex components with a multitude of settings, pages, nested tables, and scrolls. And both of these components have several features that none of the schools in the university are using. That's pretty common across universities. The course catalog and schedule of classes are components which have a ton of features, but not everybody uses. And so what they found was the problem. Lots of problems were happening in course catalog and schedule of classes that the curriculum coordinators and the registrar were having difficulty maintaining. For one thing, there were unnecessary fields on these components that curriculum coordinators would accidentally enter information in, which would cause downstream enrollment issues and issues in the printed schedule. And then there are also fields which are common at the course level and the class level. Those of you in the HCM world might recognize fields that are common in position data and in job data. And what they were finding was that the curriculum coordinators were editing class data differently than the same fields in course data, causing out of sync issues between the two levels. And then finally, there was just consistent feedback from curriculum coordinators to the registrar that data entry is too complex. And then contrarily, the registrar was doing a series of audit queries every term to find these inconsistencies and then give feedback to the curriculum coordinators about what was going wrong. And that was really just causing this feedback loop that was frustrating everybody. So can Page and Field Configurator tackle these complex components and actually streamline the user experience for curriculum coordinators? Yes. They went live with it, and it was a pretty unique solution. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So the reason why I considered this a complex solution was because, number one, the volume of adjustments that they wanted to make. So this configuration solution, including adjusting almost 200 fields across 3 different components: course, class, and new class. And it also involved hiding several unused tabs. Almost all of the page and field configuration options were used. We hid unused tabs, we hid unused fields, we added field requirements, we made certain fields display only, we added defaulted values, and then we enabled alternate displays based on user role. So again, the undergraduate curriculum coordinators were the only ones that could see all of these new configurations in what I call an alternate display. A couple of things that we're not going to go over in this webinar today, which I would also consider pretty complex solutions, are multiple sequences and then sequence criteria. These 2 features were not used for the proof of concept that we're going to go over today, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. But again, I'm happy to answer your questions about how to get them up and running, and would love to hear some of your experiences about these features if you have some of the good, the bad, and the ugly to share about those too.
Margaret, we've got a question.
Okay.
The question is, in accounts payable, if we put a T in the invoice date field, it will default to today's date. Can we use the Page and Field Configurator to do the default for today's date? You know?
That's a great question. I haven't actually tried that, but what I can tell you, there's a great webinar, there was a great Quest webinar that where Oracle came and talked about what's in the roadmap for Page and Field Configurator. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. My understanding is that right now you can't use system defaults. I know that's not the name for it. I think you know what I mean, like the T, it's a system
Right.
fields or, yeah. I don't think as of today you can use those, but I think they are in the roadmap.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Great question. Okay, so these were some of the, these were all of the features that we're going to use. Let's take a look at how they actually look in the real world. So this is a page called Course Catalog Offerings in Campus Solutions. This is so that the component is Course Catalog and the page we're looking at is the Offerings tab. Hopefully right away you can see that there's a lot of stuff going on the Course Offerings tab, a lot of fields, and I can tell you right away that there's a lot of things that aren't used. So here your course offerings are in a scroll area and they're kind of 2 levels down. You can see here's the header level, here's the effective date level, then we get to the course offering level. And then within each course offering, you can also specify an enrollment group and you can specify a taxonomy within the course offering. There's a ton of checkbox options to enable a bunch of things that may or may not be used. And then, so what we ended up doing, here's the side-by-side. You can see that there are a number of fields which were rendered display only so that the user, the value that they wanted to see was already defaulted and they couldn't edit it. We got rid of a bunch of checkboxes like blind grading and GL interface that the university simply didn't use. OEE, dynamic dating, university wasn't using dynamic dating, so we just got rid of those fields to unclutter the page. And then again, the taxonomy group box is completely hidden. This is kind of a funny one because you'll see in the next slide that it's not always consistent behavior. So in this case, we actually hid both of these fields, the CIP code field and the HEGIS code field. Once we hid both of those fields, the result was that the whole box then disappeared. On the next page, you'll see that's not always consistent behavior. Let's look at one more example. This is also the course catalog component, but this is a different tab. This is the components tab on the course catalog components. You can see here we also have a feature, some functionality called course attendance, some more checkboxes, got a button here, LMS integration. And in the end, this university doesn't use most of the features on this components page. And the result, what you see here is a lot of added white space. This is an example where all of the fields are actually hidden within the course attendance scroll, but the scroll doesn't disappear. So we weren't able, and that's one place where it kind of is inconsistent behavior. So it was possible to create a more streamlined user experience and only show the fields that the users actually needed to enter. But you can see one of the kind of unfortunate results was extra white space. The fields don't actually reorganize on the page to make use of the extra space.
Margaret, we've got another question. Actually, it's a very opportune one based on what you're talking about right now. Can Page and Field Configurator disable the ability to check the plus and minus icons on a page in addition to disabling editability for the fields on the page?
No, it cannot. That's a fantastic question. One of the other limitations, of Page and Field Configurator is that there are certain page objects that you can't touch. So for instance, page objects are going to be any of your navigation, so your find option, your view all, any of your navigation buttons in the scroll area or within a grid. Also, you can't make any changes to these scroll area headings. So where it says course attendance, we couldn't make a change to that. Also, there are some navigations at the bottom of the page. Some of you might recognize at the bottom of your page is a notify button. You can't use Page and Field Configurator to hide those navigation buttons on the bottom of your pages. Hope that answers the question. All right, let's take a look at one more example here. This is going to be a different component. This is our maintain schedule of classes component. This is the meetings tab. This is a really busy tab. You can see there's a lot going on here. And again, not all of these features are used. So let's take a look at the features that were turned off. This side by side, it's kind of hard to tell that there was actually quite a lot of adjustments on this page. It's still pretty busy. But again, a little bit of inconsistent behavior. I'll point out here in the meeting pattern scroll, there's these topic IDs. So topic ID, free format topic, contact hours, and print topic. All 4 of these fields are hidden. And in this case, the scroll, the group box kind of shifted the information around to get rid of some of the white space here where it didn't in the previous page. And then also, again, the room characteristics. Even though we've hidden all of the fields within this nested grid here, the grid itself still remains, and there's not really a way to get rid of that. To my understanding, this there's no solution for that in the roadmap that I know of. I think this is just one of the kind of one of the drawbacks I think that's out there that you'll have to decide whether or not it's useful for your application.
Margaret, I've got another question for you.
Please, go for it.
Can you enable or disable fields based on institution or business unit?
That is a fantastic question, and the answer, unfortunately, is no. So we'll talk about that a little bit later as far as, later we'll talk a little bit more specifically about evaluation criteria. And what I mean by that is for your solution, how do you decide whether Page and Field Configurator is right for your project? And we'll talk a little bit more about the limitations and when it's a great solution and when you might have to look in a different direction.
Thanks.
Yeah, so the answer to that was no. Unfortunately, you can't make settings in Page and Field Configurator that are dynamic based on inputs in other fields. That's my last before and after slide. Any other questions about these before and after slides?
I don't see any yet.
Okay, thanks. All right. So now that we've had a look at a complex page where there are lots of adjustments made, and you can kind of see some of the inconsistent behavior and also some of the benefits really of getting rid of the fields that people aren't using and reducing the possibility that people are going to click things that they shouldn't be clicking. Let's talk about some of the benefits and drawbacks of this feature. So number one, I have to say, Page and Field Configurator is really easy to get up and running. So you saw how easy it was to simply add a new value with an existing component. All of the tabs and fields that are available on that component are loaded up. So there's no additional work you have to do to go and find them. So you add a component and everything you need to make the adjustments is right there for you. It's pretty straightforward clicking around component pages. So when you add a new row to make an adjustment to a field and then click that select icon to go and find the field that you want to adjust, you have the top of the page is laid out with all of the pages or tabs associated with the component. And then as you click through the different pages, it will load up all of the fields belonging on that page. All of the fields are then listed in order from top to bottom and right to left. So it's not fast, I'll say that. It's definitely not fast, especially when you have a lot of adjustments you're trying to make. But it's all pretty straightforward. There wasn't a ton of hunting to find what I needed. It was laid out pretty clearly. It's also straightforward to create multiple views of the same component using sequences. So when I say multiple views, what I really mean is alternate component displays. So Page and Field Configurator is really creating an alternate display. And you can apply that to everybody, or you can apply that just to specific user roles. So just those users have an alternate display of the component. I found that it was also very straightforward to control the users who are going to see each of these alternate displays. So for instance, you saw how easy it was to create a user list. It is, right now, it is restricted to roles, but I think you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to roles, because you can use existing roles, you can create new roles, or you could consider creating a dynamic query-based role that kind of dynamically will dynamically builds those user lists for you.
So Margaret, with regards to that last question that we talked about, setting conditional behavior, hide, and display of fields based on institution or business unit, if you were to, one of the questions that was just raised is, if you were to establish separate roles for each of those, could you then accommodate that kind of conditional behavior?
I think so, yes. Yeah, so if you have a role, so let's just say, I'm just going to use department because I think that's pretty broadly applicable. So let's say you've got your, and I'm kind of stuck in higher education mode, so I'm going to talk about the history department versus the science department. And let's just say that you wanted to have a certain default value for users with this history role, and then a different default value with users with that sciences role. That's definitely possible. That's one level of granularity that you can do. I hope that clarifies. Yeah, so I hope that clarifies, like if you're a user and you select and you go to the page and select one business unit over another business unit, then it won't dynamically affect the default values. But if you are preloading these views with default values based on the user role, then yes, that's a way that you could accomplish that.
Now we've got two other questions that have come in. Can
Okay.
you change text color and make them read-only to indicate fields do not need to be filled instead of hide them? This will keep the consistency of the delivered page layout. If you need to use some of the hide field in the future, or hidden fields in the future, people might think it's not available if the configuration is not well documented. Just an alternative to consider.
There's the Page and Field Configurator tool doesn't give you any way to affect the color or any of the styling on the pages, if that's what you're asking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, that answers the question.
Yeah, so if you, yeah, go ahead.
Could you please touch on what delivered roles give access to the Page and Field Configurator?
Yes, I can do that. I don't know it by heart. I don't know it by heart, but I want to say it's like EAOW 1000 is the delivered permission list for Page and Field Configurator. The only reason I know that, I'm not sure if that's the exact role. I can certainly look it up and we can provide it to all the participants. But what I love about that question is that if you're used to having PeopleSoft Administrator and you want to go in and play with your Page and Field Configurator, as I did, then when it goes live, you'll definitely want to find out what permission list. You'll want to add that permission list for the actual Page and Configurator administrative page to one of your back-end admin roles. And the reason you'll want to do that is because if you end up wanting to go and click that apply configuration button in production after you use another term here, migration workbench, to move all the configuration, then you will need access to the component in production. So that's a good question.
And one other question, then you can get on. Does Field Configurator supersede field properties in record definition or people code?
That's a great question. Maybe a little technical for me, but what I can tell you is that I can talk more about the event mapping framework. And what's really important, if you're not already familiar with the event mapping framework, I had to get lots more familiar with it to troubleshoot some of the issues that I had implementing this solution. I can talk a little bit more about that on a subsequent slide. In fact, I have a bullet point for it in the next slide if we can hold off and talk about that in a little bit.
Sounds good. Thanks. That's it.
Okay. Alrighty. In fact, the last bullet point on this slide, easy push button event mapping directly to Page and Configurator tool. So the important word here is event mapping. You saw at the very end of the video that the event mapping is created automatically based on the fields that you make adjustments to. So if you're not familiar with event mapping, let's talk about the bad. I've got one bullet point here. One thing that was pretty annoying and pretty tedious about using this tool was that fields needed to be adjusted one at a time. So you saw I had to add a new row to the adjustment grid, select a field, make the adjustment. You can always add 10 rows, but you have to select each field into the grid one at a time. So as you can imagine, I did make 63 adjustments on one component, another 80 adjustments on another component. So it was kind of tedious to add them all up. So, just put on your headphones, put on your favorite album, and click away. And then lastly, you need to click Apply Configuration to the Event Mapping Framework before you're going to see any changes. So what the Event Mapping Framework does, in a nutshell, and this is a very non-technical explanation, it basically, it'll supersede, so Page and Field Configurator, to use your term, will supersede what would normally happen on the page for certain PeopleCode events. So we're talking about row init events, row insert events, things like that. So when the page is loaded up, the event mapping will, the event mapping framework will ensure that what you configured for that role will get loaded up onto the page first. And then when you add new rows to the scroll area, or if you add a new effective date, or if you add new rows to a grid, those row insert and row init events are going to go ahead and apply your Page and Configurator settings when those events occur on a page. I hope that's a good explanation. I would love to hear if that was helpful at all. Okay, so you'll let me know. And one of the reasons why that's important is because if you remember in some of my screenshots, we made the course component, for example, has 3 different tabs that we made adjustments to. And if you're like me, I went to the first page and I made the 26 field, I hid the 26 fields that I needed to hide there on that first page. And then I applied the configuration and I went and logged in as my test user and I checked my work. And then I continued. And then if you then make subsequent changes after you click Apply Configuration, you're going to have to go ahead and click Apply Configuration again so that you can pick up any new events or you can pick up any field events based on the new fields that you added to your configuration.
Margaret,
Sorry,
we had one other question come in.
Yeah, go ahead.
How did you go about migrating these changes from environment to environment?
That's a great question. I struggled a little bit as to whether to include that information in this particular webinar because it's actually a completely different component. But there are, if you're familiar with ADS or Migration Workbench, there are some pre-configured packages for Migration Workbench where you can add your configuration to Migration Workbench and then kind of move it through those stages in Migration Workbench.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so just to kind of reiterate this one, just be aware that event mapping is working, and if you make changes to your configuration as you go, you'll want to just make sure that you stay on top of clicking that Apply Configuration and picking up any new events that you might have been added. All right, and finally, the ugly. So this page, what I really wanted to talk about was some of the issues that we came across that really gave our business office a little bit of stop and pause about whether this tool was going to be right for their application. The first one is really just my problem. This was, so for all of you functional users out there who might be responsible for configuring the solution, the description fields are pretty annoying. I'll just put it that way. For any given page that's got a certain number of prompts, you're also going to have a certain number of description fields. So for instance, you can see here, we've got, all of the description fields. They all have the same name, and they all have the same field name, and they all have the same label. Obviously, you don't see the label on the page, you just see the description pop up. So this is where that inspect tool is going to be your friend. So when you hide a prompt field, you're going to also need to hide its description, so its related description. And to find that description, the best thing to do is just use your inspect tool and find out what record it belongs to. And that'll give you a little bit of a clue when you're hunting for your description field to figure out which one you're actually looking at. Another good tip when it comes to hiding description fields is that remember that the fields are also displayed in the tool in order. So generally, if you are just clicking next and paging along all your fields, you'll find the description field that you need to hide right under its associated prompt field. Another issue was the white space and empty grids. Fortunately, the registrar and the department users who were testing this feature, they found that they just weren't sensitive enough to some of these, to some of this look and feel. They found that the utility of what they were getting was much greater than some of these, than some of the aesthetics. But you'll want to evaluate that for your users, whether or not they're sensitive to these kind of things, whether it presents an issue for them. And then finally, we talked a little bit about event mapping and a little bit about people code events. Field change events are not accommodated. So while row init and row insert events are automatically mapped in event mapping, where you have field change events, Page and Field Configurator is just, it's not handling those, and my understanding, and it's not in the roadmap because it tends to be really, really complicated. So one example of where a field change event is not accommodated. This add fee button here, in the actual business case for the university, we hid this add fee button. They don't use course fees in PeopleSoft. But there's a certain situation where if you add a new row with a new component and mark that next component as primary, then that field change event to mark this next component as primary will make the add fee button reappear. So even though it's configured to be hidden, if there's a field change event on that page, those fields might come back. So that's something else to consider. All right, so as long as we're talking about, the bad and the ugly, let's talk about some of these improvements that are on the horizon. Again, there was a really good Quest webinar that was delivered by an Oracle representative where they walked through all of the new features that are going to be coming out. And here's just a brief summary. The functionality was extended to secondary pages, so if you have some of the newer versions of PeopleTools, you might get that functionality. You can the extended user criteria, you can activate or inactivate your different sequences. And then in 2020, they've got some cool features. You can use data masking. So one of the things you'll actually be able to configure is masking on certain fields. So that's kind of cool. All right, so what about you? What about you and your project? How do you know if Page and Field Configurator is going to be right for your project? Okay, so here are a couple of pointers. Number one, the component should already handle the needed transactions. So you won't be able to add fields that aren't already there. If a page already handles the transactions that you need to handle, then you're already in the right direction. If your component has one or more fields that aren't useful, so simply there's just too much there, then this tool is really good to streamline user experience for specific user groups. If the component is useful, but the field labels that PeopleSoft delivers simply just don't match your terminology, this is a really great tool for that. It's super easy to change field labels on a page. The one thing you can't change would be like grid headings and stuff, though. It's the only caveat. When you know that these alternate views can be determined using PS roles or combinations of field criteria, then this is also a tool that you can use. And then finally, when users aren't fussy about page aesthetics. So again, that white space and empty grids, if your users aren't fussy about those things, then this is a good tool for you to look at. And how about when your requirements extend past those concepts, though? So you're going to want to look in a different direction when what you really need are new custom fields on a page. The page just isn't collecting all the information that you actually need. If you need to break app designer rules, so for instance, you can't unrequire fields with Page and Field Configurator. You can't make already display-only fields now editable, and you can't unhide hidden fields on the page. You also can't rearrange fields on the page or rearrange pages within the component. So it's kind of what you see is what you get here. The fields are going to stay in the order that they are according to App Designer. And then if what you really need to do is build security, so for instance, if you're going to Page and Field Configurator just to make all of the tabs display only, which is something that you could do, I would recommend using a permission list instead. It's a little bit more straightforward and easier to maintain. And then finally, if you need very specific conditional functionality. So for instance, if you need to conditionally hide a scroll area based on a field input, so let's say, for instance, you only want to show that class attendance. You only want to show the class attendance fields if something was entered on a previous page. That's not something you can really do with this tool. You can't filter drop-down or prompt tables. So if you have multiple users and a prompt shows values that aren't applicable to those users, unfortunately, you can't use this tool to filter those values for them. You can't dynamically default field values. We talked about that role-based workaround, but otherwise there's no conditional defaulting. And finally, you can't add workflow with this tool. So this is a good time to point out that at the client university, where the undergraduate arts and sciences college thought Page and Field Configurator was a great tool for them because they have the most diverse group of departments, and they wanted to retain as much of the native functionality in the course catalog and schedules of classes as delivered. What I can say is the other specialty colleges at that university chose to use GT eForms instead to accomplish a very different goal. And because these specialty colleges have a much narrower curriculum, they wanted to curate a much more conditional and dynamic and streamlined user experience to update courses and maintain their schedule of classes. So they went with GT eForms so they could get that level of granularity. All right.
Oh, Margaret, we've got another question that came in. Is the Page
Sure.
and Field Configurator only available for Fluid users?
No, it's available for Classic users as well. Yep, you can use it on Classic pages.
Excellent.
Yeah. All right. So a couple of other things to remember. Configuration can be applied to registered components only. I have yet to try Page and Field Configurator on custom components. I wish I had gotten a chance to do that just to tell you guys about it, but I never got a chance to do it. And then again, secondary pages and other modal windows cannot use the Page and Field Configurator unless you have some of these newer versions installed. Configurations still require maintenance and migration. So again, you're just like with any configuration or with any new applications in your system, you're going to want to maintain the changes in your development environment and then use Migration Workbench to then move these configurations up the migration path. And then again, because if you're using role-based user lists, just coordinate with your security teams because again, if your roles change permission lists or you retire roles or you change roles, people's experience in PeopleSoft is going to be impacted if those roles are set up on Page and Field Configurator. And then finally, configurations must often be applied to multiple components where the same fields and pages appear. So for our campus users, again, I had to duplicate all of my configurations between the class data component and the class data new component. So one is maintain schedule of classes and the other is schedule a new course. They're virtually identical components, but they had different component names, so I had to duplicate all of my configuration. For our HCM clients, you might consider, like for instance, job data and then job data EMP. Those are different components, even though they look very similar. You would have to configure those separately. And then we have a couple of other useful resources here that when you get this presentation later, you can click on those and check them out.
And Margaret, I've got what looks like one final question here. What's the method to migrate configurations again?
It's called Data Migration Workbench. It is in, if you go to People Tools, it's in the Lifecycle Tools menu.
Thank you. And
again, because it's not,
go ahead.
Because it can be used for, I chose not to go over it in much detail in this presentation because it's a whole component of in and of itself, and then it can be used for more than just PeopleSoft, Page and Field Configurator. So there's a lot more to know about data migration workbench, but it is the primary method to move Page and Field configurations.
And are Page and Field configurations preserved when applying new images, or do they need to be re-entered like personalizations?
Because this is a configuration tool, all of your configuration is going to be retained as new images are added. Although, again, because this is a relatively new tool, relatively new utility, and they're going to be rolling out improvements year over year, it's a good idea to just, include testing this component in your regular image testing scheme.
Can Page and Field Configurator be used on activity guides and work centers?
Yes, I think so. I don't have any direct experience with it, but I know our CEO, Paul Taylor, has delivered webinars in the past where he shows some changes in context of navigation collections and kind of other presentations of the component.
Awesome. Thank you. So it looks like this is these are my wrap-up slides.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer more questions if they come up. I hope that wasn't too fast.
Yeah, I think that was perfect. So yeah, as Margaret just mentioned, over the next 10 minutes, I've just got a couple of slides to wrap things up. And as we do this, if you've got additional questions, by all means, keep those coming. So Margaret pointed out a lot of really good content about understanding Page and Field Configurator, what it can do and what it can't do. One of the things that we always try to impress upon our clients is use delivered PeopleSoft capabilities to the greatest extent that you can. And when you hit the ceiling, or when you hit a roadblock on not being able to take that farther, there are options available to you. One of those is GT eForms for PeopleSoft. And the slide that Margaret has up here goes through just some of the very quick hits on benefits of GT eForms. One is that it is Oracle validated. I mentioned at the beginning. It is the only form builder that is certified by Oracle for PeopleSoft. It's 100% People Tools based, so it lives inside your PeopleSoft environment. It is predominantly configuration based. So a lot of the things that you're probably excited about Page and Field Configurator for, the same would apply to GT eForms, although it takes all of that one step further. And instead of just allowing you to make configuration changes or configurable changes to existing components, GT eForms allows you to configure wholly custom pages from scratch. So it's extremely powerful. It allows you to put whatever fields you want on there, whether those are delivered fields or custom fields, organize those into segments, lay out your page however you'd like, include text on that page in case you need instructional directions for the user. And then when there are changes needed as your systems evolve, as your business requirements change, those are primarily configuration-based changes. So business analysts can go in there, change the fields, change the field labels, change the design of the page, add new fields. to that page and change workflow routing, things like that. You've got native real-time access to all of your PeopleSoft data. So in terms of being able to have your forms pre-populate or have those pages pre-populate and default data that already exists within PeopleSoft, that activity is configuration-based. And you're able to lay out conditional behavior so that your pages and your fields and your segments behave differently based on who's interacting with it or what task they're executing as they go through the form or the process. You're leveraging your existing PeopleSoft workflow, security, and infrastructure. You've got unlimited flexibility in how these forms look and behave and how they route. And finally, it can all be fluid. You've got a choice when you're creating your forms if you want to launch those as classic or fluid, and the choice is made just by flipping a toggle switch. What that all enables you to do, having that kind of flexibility within a tool like that, is enable auto-population and intelligent defaulting of data. So users don't have to fill in all those fields on the form. Related displays, so that you've got the English language equivalent laid out next to whatever your alphanumeric field value might be. You're able to restrict prompt values, and that was one of the things that Margaret commented on. You can't do that with Page and Field Configurator, but you can limit prompt values intelligently with GTE forms. You're able to define field attributes, how those fields behave, when they hide, when they display, whether they're mandatory or not, and define your field layout or your form layout. Identify and create conditional logic so that it's guiding the user through this process intelligently, intuitively, and easily, and have that based on values that the user enters in other fields, so it automatically opens up additional fields or takes them to a different page or opens up additional segments. You've got conditional routing and email notifications. And finally, you've got easy access to any of these forms based on their PeopleSoft security. You've got easy access to initiate forms, review forms if you're an approver, and also easy access to that data to report on with regards to any of that form data that you might want to query. And Margaret, for this, I think you want to make sure that the speaker on your computer is off, because there's audio on this video that we don't need to share. And this is just a, oops. This is just a quick demonstration of an eForm that was created for veteran status declaration. The thing to point out with regards to what you're going to see here is this was all configuration based. And it allowed the business analyst to build this form in about 45 minutes to automate the process to allow a new employee or a student to declare their status as a veteran. So this is an example of how that form looks. Again, after 45 minutes of configuration, they were able to lay out the form to the design that they wanted and also configure the kind of behavior that they wanted as the user goes through filling out the form. So we're going to go ahead and click on this veteran status form within a list of maybe other onboarding forms that a user might need to fill out. And we're going to see the form open up with a number of different segments. We see that it's automatically populated information about the user, so it recognizes who they are. They're logged into PeopleSoft self-service, obviously. You could go ahead and have it default or auto-populate whatever data might already exist within PeopleSoft. And here we've got some nicely formatted text. That's all configurable within any page or segment of your form. Oh, Margaret, we just switched screens, I think. There we go. And then below that, we're going to see one field that the user needs to respond to. We seem to be having a delay on the...
Sorry, Scott. Let me see if I can keep it moving.
So we've got one field now before they submit that they need to respond to, whether or not they're a veteran, based on the description above. If they end up selecting no, then they can go ahead and submit and move on with their day. But if they end up selecting yes, this video just doesn't like us today. So no has no impact on the form, but if they select yes, we see a new segment open up with additional fields they need to respond to. So again, that's all configurable, allowing the form to execute that kind of conditional behavior. We've got some formatted text again. We select which veteran type we would consider ourselves. And again, depending on which selection I make, it may or may not impact what the form looks like. If I select Identify Protected Veteran, all of a sudden the form recognizes that it needs to gather additional information. So we'll go ahead and have the user respond to these questions. They can enter their military discharge date. If we were to have an attachment segment on here, they might be prompted to upload their military discharge papers. They can add their comments if they want to, and then go ahead and submit. So a very interactive user experience. We don't present the user with a whole lot of fields and then have them figure out which ones apply to them. We only show them those fields that do apply to their particular situation, their circumstance, and then walk them through the form very intuitively. We can see what the workflow routing is configured for this particular form, and then we also see the transaction log in terms of who has taken action on it. So that is a quick overview of what you can do with GT eForms, a very exciting option to Page and Field Configurator once you've, if you get to a point where you can't take the tool any further than it's already designed, GT eForms obviously allows for unlimited flexibility in terms of what you can create and what you can automate. One other question that's come up, what impact does Page and Field Configurator have on component interfaces, Margaret?
That's a good question. I don't have any direct experience with component interfaces, but my understanding is that component interfaces are initiated by, they're always initiated by a user. There's always a user associated with component interfaces, or at least the ones that we use with GT eForms. So I think in that case, unless the user is or has a role for a specific display, then there wouldn't be any impact on the component interface. It really only impacts users that are seeing that selective experience. So one example is that in the screenshots that I showed you, if I was logged in as a registrar administrator, then I wouldn't see any of the changes that those users in the curriculum coordinator role would see. So if your component interface was acting as an admin user, it probably wouldn't have any impact at all. That'd be my expectation.
Okay. Very good. Well, Margaret, thank you very much for the session this afternoon. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to submit those. You can reach me at scott@gideontaylor.com. We're more than happy to respond to those. Each of you will be receiving a follow-up email with links to today's session. Go ahead and review that as you like and share it with others. And we hope that you choose to join us on future webinars. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.